Amelia Hart was a bright, adventurous woman who dreamed of exploring the world, but 90 days after she traveled alone to Egypt for a wedding, her name was splashed across newspapers under the headline "Every Traveler Dreads." Amelia Hart was the kind of woman who never shied away from an adventure. At 29, she had already traveled across several countries, but Egypt was a destination she had always dreamed of. When an old university friend sent her an invitation to a wedding in Cairo, Amelia didn't hesitate. She booked her ticket within days, excited by the thought of finally experiencing the land of pyramids, golden deserts, and bustling bazaars. For her, this was more than a celebration. It was a chance to step into history and explore a culture she had admired since childhood. Her family was supportive but slightly worried. They reminded her that traveling alone could be risky, especially in a country she had never visited before. Amelia brushed off their concerns with a smile, assuring them she would stay safe and check in regularly. She was independent, confident, and eager to prove she could manage on her own. In her eyes, Cairo was a city of stories waiting to be discovered, and she was determined to write her own. The weeks leading up to her trip were filled with planning. She carefully picked outfits suitable for both the wedding and sightseeing. She researched famous landmarks, bookmarked hidden cafes, and made a list of places she wanted to see beyond the celebrations. Her suitcase carried not just clothes, but also a journal where she planned to record every moment. On the day of her departure, Amelia felt a rush of excitement as she walked through the airport. The thought of meeting friends, celebrating love, and wandering the ancient streets of Egypt filled her with joy. She didn't know it yet, but this journey, which began with laughter and high hopes, would soon be remembered for reasons far darker than she could ever imagine. The wedding was everything Amelia had imagined and more. From the moment she entered the grand hall, she was captivated by the glittering lights, the ornate decorations, and the energy that filled the air. Music echoed through the room, blending traditional Egyptian sounds with modern beats that kept the guests dancing for hours. The bride was radiant in her gown, surrounded by family and friends who celebrated with unrestrained joy. Amelia found herself swept into the rhythm of the night, laughing, clapping, and taking photographs of every dazzling moment. For Amelia, this wasn't just about attending a wedding. It was about experiencing something extraordinary. She marveled at the customs, the rituals, and the warmth of the people around her. Everyone welcomed her as though she were part of the family. Plates of rich food passed from table to table, and she tasted dishes she had never tried before, savoring each bite as part of the adventure. Her phone filled with snapshots, dancing bridesmaids, golden platters of food, and the bride and groom smiling beneath cascades of flowers. As the celebrations continued late into the night, Amelia felt something stir within her. The colors, the culture, the laughter, it all felt intoxicating. She began to think of her trip differently. It no longer seemed like a short holiday to attend a wedding, but an opportunity to stay longer and see the world beyond the decorated hall. Friends encouraged her to explore Egypt while she was there, and the idea settled firmly in her mind. When the wedding ended, Amelia should have been preparing to return home, but instead, she extended her stay. She wanted more than memories of music and dancing. She wanted to uncover Egypt's hidden beauty. It was a decision that would change everything. Amelia's days after the wedding were filled with restless curiosity. She no longer wanted to remain inside the safe walls of her hotel. The city outside called to her. Cairo was alive with movement, streets crowded with vendors, the scent of spices drifting through the air, and the constant hum of traffic mixed with the sound of voices. She wandered alone through the markets, fascinated by stalls overflowing with colorful fabrics, handcrafted jewelry, and aromatic teas. Everything felt new, vibrant, and alive, and she recorded her impressions carefully in her journal. She ventured further with each passing day. Museums drew her in with their ancient treasures, and she stood for hours staring at relics older than entire civilizations. The pyramids left her speechless, towering against the sky, their sheer presence reminding her of how small she truly was in the face of history. She took photographs of everything, smiling for the camera with monuments rising behind her, eager to share her experiences with friends back home. Yet, as Amelia grew more adventurous, her habits made her stand out. She was often alone, always with her camera or journal, moving with the freedom of someone who wasn't afraid. Hotel staff began noticing her patterns: when she left, where she walked, the times she returned. Strangers in the markets recognized her face after several visits. Among them was one man who paid closer attention than the rest. He observed quietly, never approaching, yet always within view. Amelia remained unaware of the eyes following her. She believed she was blending in, but her independence made her unmistakably visible. What began as harmless exploration was slowly weaving her into a story she could never have predicted. Something dark had already taken notice of her. 90 days after Amelia first landed in Egypt, her lively updates suddenly disappeared. For weeks, she had posted photos of her travels, shared journal entries with friends, and sent cheerful messages to her family. Then, without warning, everything went silent. Her parents grew uneasy when her phone rang unanswered, and her social media accounts showed no signs of activity. At first, they hoped it was just poor internet connection, but as the days stretched on, concern turned into dread. Amelia was not the type to vanish without a word. Back in Cairo, the hotel staff noticed her absence too. One morning, Amelia had checked out carrying only a small backpack. She did not return that evening, and her larger luggage remained untouched in the room. Days later, when the cleaning staff entered, they found her belongings neatly arranged, clothes folded, her journal left half-filled, her passport tucked away in a drawer. There was no sign of struggle, no explanation for her sudden departure. Local authorities were alerted, and soon, posters bearing Amelia's photograph began circulating. Her face appeared in newspapers and across television screens under a chilling headline: "Missing British Tourist." Investigators pieced together her last known steps, but the trail was thin and troubling. Witnesses recalled seeing her walking toward a narrow side street that morning, a place less traveled by tourists. Her family flew to Egypt, desperate for answers, clinging to the hope that she might still be found alive. The streets of Cairo buzzed with speculation, and every lead brought more questions than answers. Amelia, once just a traveler in search of adventure, had become the subject of a mystery that gripped two nations. What had begun as a holiday was now a haunting disappearance. The investigation into Amelia's disappearance began with urgency. Detectives retraced her steps, starting from the hotel where she had last been seen. Security cameras provided the first vital clue. Footage captured Amelia leaving the building with a small backpack, her expression calm, almost carefree. She walked past the busy main road and turned into a narrower street that tourists rarely visited. Just seconds later, another figure appeared on the recording, a man in a dark jacket, keeping a steady distance behind her. Investigators studied the hotel room she had left behind. Inside, they discovered items that painted a picture of her final days. Her suitcase remained open with clothing still neatly folded, suggesting she hadn't planned to vanish. A journal lay on the bedside table, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. Toward the end, however, the entries became less structured, almost rushed. Scribbled names of places and brief notes stood out, some underlined as though she wanted to remember them quickly. The final line read simply, "Not sure about him." Detectives interviewed vendors from the nearby market who remembered Amelia. A few said she often asked about historic sites, while others recalled seeing her in conversation with a man whose face they could not clearly describe. The vague details offered little certainty, but one consistent thread emerged. She had not been entirely alone in her last days. The investigation widened, pulling in more resources, combing through hours of CCTV, and mapping her movements. The picture that began to form was troubling. Amelia's disappearance no longer looked like an accident or a random act. Every clue pointed to the possibility that someone had been watching her closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. As detectives dug deeper, a new lead surfaced that shifted the entire direction of the case. Interviews with wedding guests revealed that Amelia had not spent all her time alone. During the celebrations, she had grown friendly with a local man who seemed charming and attentive. He was often seen lingering near her table, offering to show her around the city, and even helping her translate in crowded markets. At the time, no one thought much of it. To outsiders, it looked like harmless companionship, but investigators began to see it differently. When his name was checked in police records, a darker history came to light. The man had been previously linked to scams targeting tourists, particularly women traveling alone. Allegations of fraud, theft, and even harassment had been filed against him, though none had led to a lasting conviction. He had a reputation for vanishing whenever things became serious. To the detectives, this connection felt far from coincidental. They began piecing together Amelia's journal notes with the timeline of her movements. Several of the scribbled names corresponded with locations where this man was known to frequent. Witnesses described seeing Amelia with someone matching his description in the days before she disappeared. He had become part of her daily routine, gaining her trust little by little. Authorities now believed Amelia may have agreed to meet him privately on the morning she vanished. It explained why she carried only a backpack and why she strayed from the usual tourist routes. What had once looked like a simple holiday extension was beginning to unravel as something planned, deliberate, and dangerous. For investigators, the man who once appeared as a kind acquaintance had quickly become their primary suspect. Weeks turned into months before the search yielded its most disturbing breakthrough. A tip from a local driver led investigators to a barren stretch of desert outside Cairo, a place far removed from the usual tourist trails. The sand concealed a shallow grave, and within it lay Amelia's remains. The discovery ended her family's desperate hope, but opened an even darker chapter in the investigation. Near the site, detectives found fragments of her belongings. Her phone was shattered, deliberately smashed to prevent recovery of any data. A single earring, recognized by her family, was buried close to the surface, as though hurriedly discarded. The condition of the remains suggested she had been gone for weeks, hidden in the emptiness of the desert while searches continued in the city. It was a grim confirmation that her disappearance had never been voluntary. Forensic teams scoured the area and uncovered tire tracks leading toward the grave. The marks were carefully measured and later matched to a rental car that had been booked under the name of the same man Amelia had last been connected with. Investigators pieced together the chilling sequence. She had likely been lured away under the promise of an outing, driven to the outskirts, and left where no one would find her. The evidence tied everything back to him, but he was nowhere to be found. By the time authorities tried to question him, he had vanished completely. The charm that once drew Amelia into his orbit had masked a predator's intent. What had started as companionship had ended in betrayal and violence. The truth of Amelia's final hours was buried in silence, but the discovery in the desert confirmed that her journey had ended in tragedy. The news of Amelia's death spread quickly, shaking both Egypt and the United Kingdom. Newspapers ran her photograph alongside grim headlines, and television channels replayed the haunting timeline of her final days. What had once been celebrated as an exciting solo adventure was now framed as a cautionary tale. Tourists questioned their safety, wondering how someone could vanish so easily in such a crowded city. Amelia's name became synonymous with danger, trust misplaced, and the risks of wandering too far alone. Her family, devastated by the discovery, demanded justice. They spoke publicly, urging authorities not to let her killer slip into obscurity. Candlelight vigils were held in her hometown, where friends and neighbors remembered her not as the woman in the headlines, but as a kind, adventurous soul who had loved life and sought to experience the world. In Egypt, investigators faced growing pressure to deliver answers. Yet, the man at the center of the case had disappeared. Every lead ran cold, and whispers spread that he might have fled the country using forged documents. Some believed he had help, perhaps connections that allowed him to slip past the authorities. Without his capture, the case remained unresolved, leaving Amelia's family trapped between grief and unanswered questions. Amelia's story was transformed into more than just a crime. It became a warning echoed across travel blogs, safety advisories, and documentary screens. She had set out seeking joy, celebration, and culture, but her trust had been exploited in the worst possible way. Her name, once shared in laughter among friends, now appeared in grim headlines. The final legacy of her trip was not the adventure she dreamed of, but the tragedy that reminded the world how quickly wonder can turn into horror.